how do we open up doors and break down barriers for Indigenous people to get a job and to get mentored and to be leaders in that sector. The sad thing is that the government recently, was like, oh, you know what we should do? We should give discounts to Indigenous people. And then when someone wants to hire them, it's like, well, you can hire a discount person. Like the government thinks the fix is treat them as discounted humans and as workers. Where my thing is, I want to flip that script and say, okay, what if we equipped Indigenous people with like the best education, the best resources, the best credentials, and let them loose into the world of marketing and advertising. And they happen to rise up as the leaders within there because they're incredibly brilliant people that are resilient and incredibly, understanding and empathetic of stories and storytelling because of the way they were brought up in their history.
Welcome to ABCDEI, a podcast that explores topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion through stories of distinct and powerful lived experiences.
If you are tired of the preaching, shaming, and theory about why inclusion matters and just want to create change already, then you're in the right place.
Join us as we unlearn bias one alphabet at a time. My name is Susan Diaz.
And I'm Rohini Mukherji.
Hello, and welcome back to ABCDEI. And we're going to continue with a guest episode today in which we're going to dig into the nature of inclusion. How do we get beyond performative in marketing and communications? And along the way, we're going to try to see if we can put a bit of a specific lens, a specific BIPOC lens to the lived experience of Indigenous people here in Canada. So we're going to start, Rohini's here with me and we'll introduce our guest in a second. But Rohini, how do you think we're doing with season 2? Are we going where we wanted?
I think
season
so.
3. Sorry, season 3.
I think we are. I mean, I think if we've explored a number of topics, we have both felt deeply uncomfortable. So to me, it's a good sign that it's working, right? I mean, really great feedback so far. And I know personally, and I know we've talked about this, we've learned a lot. This isn't the Rohini and Susan show. It really is so boosted by the collective expertise of our guests. So I think we're on a good roll.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of guests, here we are with Darian Kovacs, who is a seasoned podcast host and founder of Jelly Marketing. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me here.
To get started, Darian, maybe a little bit of the hero's journey. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And I know I found you, we were saying earlier, in your avatar as working dad. So catch the people up a little bit on your history.
Yeah, working dad was in response to, we had a client who said, all these moms put working mom and get called working moms. Why haven't any dads done that? So I thought, I have 4 children, amazing children. I have a 2-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, and a 14-year-old who just turned 15 on the weekend. And I'm very proud to be able to work while fathering with my amazing wife. And so thus the LinkedIn title. I live here and work here in Fort Langley, BC, so it's about 45 minutes east of Vancouver. A day job, we have an agency, and we service about 80 clients with whether it's retainers or projects. And it's quite cool. Get to do things like lead generation and growing their brands with PR and digital ads. And then if you've ever seen the sitcom Grey's Anatomy, our agency is also structured like a teaching hospital. We're a teaching agency. So we have an arm of our agency called Jelly Academy, where we teach students and provide education to the end goal of helping them get their Facebook, Google, Hootsuite certificate so they can get a job in the amazing digital marketing sector. Or if they're in the sector and they've yet to pass the bar, like if they're a lawyer, you pass the bar. And if you've ever seen Suits, as we all know, Michael Ross, who was getting away with being a lawyer without having passed the bar, we're helping digital marketers pass the bar so they can, in their existing role, get a raise or just that love and endorsement that they know what they're doing.
That's awesome. I love all the analogies. If you've got a pop culture analogy in there for me, I'm listening very closely. So to get the sort of chat started today, Darian, I know that Rohini and I were keen to get your input on the idea, which kind of stemmed from a question that we were asked a while ago, which is, isn't all sort of marketing / communications, and for those who are just listening, this is, I'm doing air quotes at the moment, isn't all of it just sort of performative if you're setting out to tell people that this is what I'm doing and this is how I'm fixing it and this is how I'm making change? So maybe if we can get started chatting about what is that line? Like when people are like, ooh, I'm just becoming aware of things. I'm just becoming aware, whether it was the George Floyd event of last year or the unearthing of like over 1,000 children's graves. These are things that I think in the consciousness of many people is just like, this is the first time it's becoming real. Like in the past, it was just something very deep in history. It was not your experience. So where do they start, or we start as people, especially people at work, start to find that line between performative and actual real change?
Yeah, I'll tell a story. I was recently invited to come on CTV News because a clothing brand in Regina called 22 Fresh used and had an Indigenous child in their ad campaigns. The mother had their child in it, and the child looked awesome and had these beautiful braids, and it was the coolest thing. The mother was super stoked and really proud of it. The brand was really proud of it, and it made the news that they did this. And the saddest part of it was that it made the news, but the most exciting part of it was that it made the news. So the sad part being is that it was news that a brand would actually have Indigenous people in their advertising, as their stock images or as their models wearing the clothing, and that was so sad that was newsworthy and exciting, and this is happening. The exciting part is on the flip side, being Indigenous, it was very cool that brands are coming to light, and it's one of those, it's not too late would be my thing. And I want to encourage all brands who maybe have been discouraged or scared to do anything. And I think that's been the biggest issue, is that I just don't want fear, or a big one is, paralysis by analysis, to stop people from doing something that 22 Fresh did. And 22 Fresh, you might not have ever heard of them. They're a small brand out of Regina, but if you've heard of brands like Hudson's Bay Company and Sephora and all these other brands, it'd be so cool if they took and followed 22 Fresh's lead. And I think the issue in marketing and advertising, though, is that, Sephora is one of those incredible brands that actually took an amazing lead in doing something cool. And on National Indigenous Day in Canada, they actually hired Indigenous writers, videographers, makeup artists, people on set, and every position was an Indigenous person. And they did this incredible video. And the sad part, though, again, the fear and the worry and the concern around doing this was that they got so much criticism because they left out Afro-Indigenous people. And I want to say Sephora did a great job, and they were trying. And I think I want to speak to the Sephoras, that are listening to the show, and the other brands that are maybe considering to do what 22 Fresh did, to say, trying is okay. Like attempting at something is actually okay.
Yeah, I think that's, nobody's going to get it right out the gate on every note, right? You're going to have a misstep. We're all, we're so forgiving of mistakes when on an individual basis, we say, oh, we're just human, and, you can't work 24 hours a day. But we're much less forgiving when it comes to brands, because perhaps they represent a collective, they represent a very specific preconceived notion. There's a lot of bias that comes into, well, this brand is just this way and this brand is not inclusive. And so, there's a little bit of a confirmation bias where you're just waiting for them to fail. But I agree with you. I think brands need to start doing something. Some brands will come out the gate like a Ben and Jerry's, where they I mean, they laid it down, and when right after the murder of George Floyd, I mean, they took a stand that no other brand was ready to jump into on day one with the statements that they issued. Some brands followed, certainly, but that became their brand persona. And now people look to that brand for that level of activism around topics related to race and gender and identity. And for better or for worse, that's going to be a lens that they will be viewed with, but it also comes with high standards and, to some extent will be much less forgiving if and when they make a misstep.
Yeah, I think if we look at the root of this, I also host a podcast called Marketing News Canada. And I was like, hey, I would love to host a show and have multiple people on the show. Usually it's one-on-one and it's more of like intimate interviews. But I was like, I want to invite anyone in Canada and I'm put out the net very far to say, if you are Indigenous and in marketing, I want to have you on the show. I'm gonna have a panel. And I thought I'd get like maybe 30, 40, 50 people on this list. And I'd pick 3 or 4 at a time. I found 4 people across the nation of Canada, our entire country, 4 people who were, self-identifying or identifying as an Indigenous person who happened to work in marketing, 2 of which were in tourism. And so I hosted this panel nonetheless, and I asked them, have you ever seen yourself in marketing campaigns? Have you ever seen yourself in ads? And all of them referred to actually this pain medicine, which is quite sad. This pain medicine that used, a picture of someone with a giant headdress, and that was the only indication they saw. Or they mentioned government pamphlets that would have Indigenous people in it. So it was government kind of for Indigenous people, promoting whatever service the government supplied. But then this glimmer of hope, this ray of kind of sunshine in it was Deanna shared about 5 years ago, Sephora actually had an Indigenous advocate, incredible woman, kind of leader, spokesperson, actually in an ad campaign. And this was years ago. And so that's why I'm mentioning Sephora again, because they got blasted for attempting something that was really cool. But I feel like they actually were doing something before it was fashionable and before it was kind of on trend. But as we were talking in this group, I realized some of the really practical pieces of it. And one of the problems is if you use a tool like Canva, which again, so many digital marketers use who work within amazing organizations. Both of you might even use Canva yourselves. You're nodding your head, yes, it's amazing. But if you look up the stock images and the stock images that are connected to Canva and look up Indigenous people, again, very generalized, racialized images. And so having that conversation with Canva, and I reached out to them recently and said, hey, would you be open to having a conversation about updating your stock imagery choices and options? And they were excited. They're like, let's have that conversation. What does it look like? And how can you supply that? And how can we have Indigenous people who are actually maybe on a computer or leading and doing like a white collar job, not just a blue collar job, or, not just wearing traditional dress. And so that conversation is happening. But I think the biggest barrier I'm finding is Indigenous people, it's the chicken and egg, Indigenous people getting a job in marketing. And so what I've kind of made my mission to do, as much as, September 30th, I took my 4 children and my wife, we went to a beautiful memorial service and kind of walk through about the history of residential schools and the story about the children's rooms. They had no teddy bears, they had no blankets. And it was so, because I look back and there's my girl Evelyn, and she's got too many teddy bears, right? Like they're falling off her bed, and she's got this blanket that she loves. And reading the story next to my daughter, it's just so heartbreaking. But the hope is being able to take that heartbreak, we'll call it energy or emotion, and try to channel into how do we open up doors and break down barriers for Indigenous people to get a job. And to get mentored and to be leaders in that sector. And the sad thing is that the government recently, was like, oh, you know what we should do? We should give discounts to Indigenous people. And then when someone wants to hire them, it's like, well, you can hire a discount person. Like, you don't go to like Home Depot for a tool. We know about these tools that are like dollar store. They're discounted. And if you've ever bought a tool from the dollar store, they always smell weird, they break, like they're not great tools. And so the government thinks the fix is treat them as discounted humans and as workers. Where my thing is, I want to flip that script and say, okay, what if we equipped Indigenous people with like the best education, the best resources, the best credentials, and let them loose into the world of marketing and advertising? And they happen to rise up as the leaders within there because they're incredibly brilliant people that are resilient and incredibly, understanding and empathetic of stories and storytelling because of the way they were brought up in their history. And so that's my goal, that's my aim, and that's my hope with providing scholarships. So our agency, we just did 54 scholarships for Indigenous people to get all of their Google, Facebook, Hootsuite credentials. And we looped in, and thanks to podcasting, yay podcasting. I had an interview with, and I'm sure I've never shared this publicly, but Best Buy came on the show. And after the interview, we were talking about, the amazing generosity and the work they do with seniors. And like Best Buy is incredible. Like they got, I want to say, thousands of iPads to seniors in homes on lockdown during COVID. And I said, what could we do for Indigenous people? And so they have set it up where any Indigenous person who wants to get a job in marketing or advertising, and they feel like they don't feel confident that they got the right cell phone or laptop, which is what you need these days, they supply them with a brand new one, shipped to their home in days. And Best Buy has done something so incredible and broken down that barrier for people.
I love what you said there. Two things that really stood out to me. Firstly, the way you talked about flipping the script, you just operationalized empathy, right? Like you just broke down empathy into action, which is, it's exactly why Susan and I started this podcast, where you said, do these three things, and that's going to show that you care and that it's not just a one-off opportunity. The other thing that I think you talked about, the discount, I'm sure both Susan and I were cringing with that, the status quo approach of, let's just go find it at a cheaper discount rate. But I think it is more about discounting or lowering the barriers to opportunity, to the equal opportunity, right? So to advancement in marketing and advertising, or advancement in industries where Indigenous participation has been low. So lower the barrier to entry, discount the entry, not the person or not the talent. It's such an interesting and human way to look at, solving the problem versus, putting a discounted rate on it.
Yeah, I'm curious how it will go. Maybe I'm totally wrong here, and maybe it'll be a huge success, and the discounts and the grants to hire people will be received really well, and people will see them as well-respected peers that are equals, and maybe even highly skilled employees that they've hired because they're amazing. And maybe I'm wrong, and I'd love to be wrong because the amount of money the government put into that was a lot. And I am hoping that it doesn't fuel racism and fuel business owners to look at certain types of people as lesser than. Because from when maybe I'm translating it wrong or maybe I'm reading it wrong, but that's how it comes across to me. Versus the flip side of saying, okay, what if we double down on investment? What if we double down on resources, and these people from the underserved community became the best and the brightest and most credentialed people that you could ever find?
Yeah. I really like that. I think, to dig a little bit more into some of the nuts and bolts of what you were saying there, Darian, I liked what you said about having that chat with Canva. And I really want some marketers to listen to that kind of sentence and say, I mentioned sometimes that I must have the worst kind of cookies attached to my name, and the kind of stuff that I get served is really weird because I have to do things like go and look for Black women at desk, or, like LGBTQ couple on a boat, as opposed to just saying couple on a boat. And then it shows me a group of different things. And Unfortunately, I've never really thought of doing that and being like, hey, Canva, how can you make this a bit better? How can you have a widget right there on the homepage, which gives me a couple of options, choose my own adventure or whatever you want to call it, where it's slightly easier for us to find it. And I got to say, if I'm not finding it and doing all of these searches, the average person is going to find just the vanilla stuff, pun intended.
Well, actually, it's not even about searching, actually. It's the fact that it doesn't even exist.
It doesn't even exist, yeah.
So that's the thing. So the chicken and egg, though, for Canva is, okay, we need to hire a photographer or find photographers that are willing to shoot and wanting to shoot Indigenous stock imagery, which has never been a big need. And so it's the whole thing of, well, maybe there's not a need now, or maybe people didn't know there was a need. And so they've gone on with the status quo of just moving ahead until someone has the conversation. I'm just using Canva as an example. I'm sure there's lots of great stock image sites, video sites out there. Canva just happens to be, I think, the largest in the world.
It's ubiquitous, right? It's the one that a majority of the people are using. You're right, yeah.
And I love the response right away. It was an email response saying, I'd love to change that. What do we need to do? How do we do it? And I love that we're in that climate right now. And I think, there's an incredible agency owner named Jeff Ward, who owns an agency out of Victoria, BC. And he did an incredible thing. Instead of being upset, and you can be angry at all of the call it stat holidays and call it very colonialized Victoria Day, he responded with a really wise response and said, okay, all my employees, there's X amount of stat days in a year, pick when you want to do them. And you don't have to celebrate Queen Victoria. You don't have to celebrate, the whole Protestant purity, Thanksgiving holiday. You can celebrate anything you want on the days you would like.
If only everyone was able to get to that place.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And so he created this model that I see and think a lot of people are following and now offering that as an option to say, stat, make it your own. Kind of like choose your own adventure. It's, choose your own stat venture in any format you want. So, and actually it's not a bad idea. You pick a holiday on a day that's not busy. It's actually smart because otherwise on a stat day, you go to Science World or the aquarium, it's very busy.
Or traffic on one of the wretched highways heading somewhere. Yeah. You're right. Trying to find that sort of like those steps that you can take. And I think I'm really taking away that point about asking for that change. Like, oh, nobody has options is, again, as marketers, not good enough. Like, ask for the options that you're looking for. So should we switch gears a little bit then for a second and talk about the another part of what comes up frequently for us in discussions, which is, often when someone points out your lack of diversity or points out your maybe the fact that you've said something, like everyone came out on National Day of Truth and Reconciliation and had all of these great commitments and how they were learning and how they were educating themselves and taking the day off to study or whatever it was. So when people do actually get to the point of regulating that or staying true to what it is that you said you would do, you tend to see that there's no real clear ownership, if I'm me. It's like, it's not a marketing leader's job to make sure that the things you said on social are being held true. Or it's, the business leader maybe isn't getting into the nuts and bolts. And with that is the emergence of this sort of diversity role, right? Some sort of leadership who's the chief inclusion officer or the chief diversity officer. So, what does that look like? I mean, and again, maybe this question is to both of you. What does that look like? How do we start to make that role count or make those statements count?
Well, in the advertising and marketing community, there is an amazing organization called POCAM. So it stands for People of Color in Advertising and Marketing. And they have a call for equity, CFE, and it's very clear whether it comes to hiring and mentorship and opportunities. And they have this really, really clear, well laid out plan for agencies and brands to follow to know how they can adhere to the requests of the community of people of color in advertising and marketing, which I think is really, really cool. Another really practical thing that brands and organizations do is sign up to become a B Corp. So you mentioned Ben & Jerry's earlier. They are a B Corp. an amazing organization that we've been a part of for a while now, where you sign up to say that you adhere to certain standards environmentally, how you treat people, how you treat the people who work for you, and really you adhere to these standards. And if you comply to it, you have to make a certain amount of points, because it's based on a point system, and then you get audited to say that you're actually following through with all that. One of them includes your shareholders agreement. Actually says that the value of the shareholders and making money for them is not the most important part of this company legally. The most important part of being a company is to help others in the world and the globe and the environment, which is pretty incredible. You get 10 points for that. Being Canadian, you get points because we have maternity leave and paternity leave, which is really, really cool. So Canadians do have an upper hand in becoming B Corps, but it's, again, a really practical, accountable way to step forward and be held to standards that I think are pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think those are really good points. I think the other thing too is that, we've had, I think last summer we saw a huge spike in the hiring of, VPs of diversity and directors of diversity. And now we're starting to see burnout among that group and people leaving those roles. And I think it is, it's, if you're a leader in an organization, thinking about two things. One is, with everything you do, whether it's a policy update, whether it's a change to your hiring form, whether it's the hiring of somebody who oversees diversity, is it building trust? Firstly, is it intended to build trust? And then secondly, is it actually building trust? Do people now have more trust? Do people have more knowledge? And I think if you're doing that, that's your gauge to know that it's not performative, right? If people are feeling safer, more comfortable, more supported, then you do you. And the other part of that is then it has to be a senior role, and it has to have authority and influence. So if it is a role that can be done away with or reports to levels of the organization that might be part of the problem, then I think it's not building trust. And in the long term, it won't build trust. So to me, it sort of comes back to trust and influence, which, I mean, those are words that marketers and advertisers and PR people, that's what we live by, right?
Yeah. And when we look at going forward, and that's where, that's the hope. The hope is, I love that you said, is led by incredible people who, for example, Indigenous people in the marketing sector, it happens to be led by them, or they happen to be on staff, versus, we all know the saying, oh, I've got a Black friend, I'm not racist, or I've got an Indigenous friend. I know about Indigenous because I have a friend. Well, it's more like a cousin. It's my cousin's friend, and we hung out one night. We're not Facebook friends yet, but I could call him, So it's one of those. But imagine if they happen to be at the water cooler with you, at the dishwasher, at lunch breaks, on team building, on Slack, on Zoom calls with you, and they tell you about what it's like, what's been hard, what's been exciting, what's been interesting, and their take on Justin Trudeau being in Tofino, right? And what was it like? And again, I maybe have a different perspective on that, where I feel like random fact, my wife and I happen to be in Tofino the very same weekend Justin and Sophia were. And we just so happened to be going to dinner the minute they were leaving the dinner with their security entourage, which actually happens to be led by a First Nations woman, which is pretty cool. And as we're walking through, Justin had his nice big blue jean jacket on. And I said to my wife, I told you I could wear jogging pants to this restaurant. That guy's wearing a jean jacket. Sure enough, it's Justin Trudeau. I think he could get away with it. With his beautiful hair waving in the wind. But my take is, and again, maybe it's going to be different than maybe most, but it was, imagine if Sophie, it was a rough go, right? She hadn't seen Justin in a while. They've got a couple kids, and it's just like, Justin, I need you in Tofino. We need to get away, and we need to get some us time, or else our marriage is going to fall apart, right? Sure, he chose a really bad day to do it, bad timing. But when marriages collapse or when relationships collapse, it's not always on the right day. It's not always perfect, and it does, hurt your work in some way or another. So my take is, what if we could extend that empathy to Justin and Sophie and their marriage and whatever isn't going on? Because I don't want to paint them with a brush. and assume stuff about them, because I feel like as an Indigenous person, I get painted with a brush. Like, oh, I don't want to hire Indigenous people because they tend to be alcoholics or they have issues with, there's all these, figments and ideas, predisposed notions. And so what if as an Indigenous person, it's like kind of like who's going to take the first step, who's going to give the first olive branch? If we could give an olive branch to Justin and Sophie and be like, man, there's probably something going on. We don't know what it is. Here's some grace. Here's an extension of grace, because life really sucks too right now. It just so happens we're also living through a pandemic. It just so happens you had a poor running in an election. The outcome was not what you wanted. But at least for the time you're going to run as our leader, I hope your marriage is okay, so that you aren't distracted all the time and making very poor decisions that aren't grounded in what's good for the world. Again, keeping note, I don't know much about things politically. I don't lean to one color or the other. But as any leader, whether he was the Green Party leader running Canada as the prime minister, or, the Orange Party leader, or whatever color, it's just if we could extend grace and in return, ideally be given grace back, and ideally be given the benefit of the doubt of saying, well, maybe we don't need to give you a discount to get hired, because maybe you're really smart and maybe you don't have, issues with learning, and you could learn something and get a job and be awesome in that position. Just maybe. So again, trying to break those down slowly here, but it's going to take time.
So well said. So that grace that you speak of and that empathy, often the equal and opposite negative force there is fear. We talked about it. We started at the top of the episode talking about the fear. Like, I'm afraid I'm going to do the wrong thing. I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm afraid I'm going to use the wrong shade of orange. I'm afraid I'm going to, call it 0.94 instead of 0.91, whatever. All of these like super micro things, which...
Or people ask, can I still use the term Indian? Can I use that word? Is that what the I stands for in BIPOC? Is it Indian? I was like, no, it's Indigenous. And he goes, what's the difference between First Nations and Indigenous? So it's like, they're great questions that people want to know.
Also, people could be Googling, to be perfectly honest, because it's 2021. And if you can Google some of the things that we've managed to Google and find out about, if you can Google and take a decision on why you shouldn't be having a vaccine, you can probably Google what the I stands for in BIPOC but I'm on the harsher end of this. Like, can I Google that for you is usually my response. Yeah. Also, by the way, you'll get a kick out of this. Someone taught me how to GIF me Googling my own things. Yes. So I can send you a GIF of me Googling it just to add effect.
Let me Google that for you. I love that site. It's a hilarious site and so sassy.
Yeah. And I like what you said there, because I think it connects back to what we talked about. Everybody is going to make mistakes along the way. You might make really glaring mistakes. You might make little missteps along the way, but extending that grace so that it's more about the attempt and the intention and the research, like Googling it so that you're not completely tone deaf. Because we need to reward progress, because if we make the barrier to participation so high that you only come in and there's only one gold medal and everybody else, if we Squid Game this, then this is, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Squid Game this. That's such a great description. Love that. And those that haven't seen it yet, competition where those who are in debt are doing really crazy kids games, risky games to make money. And they're very difficult. Many don't survive. No spoilers there. There was no spoilers, just so you know.
No, you might be our most gracious guest we've had. I mean, I just love that take on the Tofino and Trudeau experience. But I think that is very indicative of how you approach this. And I think that's, inspiring. And I think something to really think about is, because that's an individual level. You don't have to wait for your boss or your manager or your parent to do that. I can do that now, today, this afternoon. And there's something powerful about that. Thank you.
Yeah. And there's something about there's this great story about, I don't know if it's in the spice cabinet. I don't know if you have many spices in your cabinet, but there's some great spices out there, really cool ones. And there's one actually, it's a seed. So it's called a mustard seed. And if you pick them up, or even if you're in the spice aisle, or if maybe you're just only ordering groceries online and see the spice section, look up mustard seed. They're so tiny. They're so small, but it grows into one of the largest trees that's out there. And I think that's where, it gives me some hope when I look at these little mustard seeds and I think, okay, if we can do little tiny things, and maybe it's, opening that door for someone or asking a question about what they went through, or extending that grace that we wish someone gave us. Right. And again, but it's that tricky thing. It's overcoming that position of fear, to becoming vulnerable, to extending that, grace, be it to say, hey, that's how I'd love to be treated in this situation. I wish someone gave me the benefit of the doubt. And so if we can do those little things, I hope we could change it, the country slowly. And I hope by the time my 4 kids are working in places, it'd be so cool if the role of DEI, or whatever role it is, or whatever DEI consultants they are, I'm sure they're listening right now and they have amazing jobs and should keep their jobs. But imagine if they weren't as needed. It wasn't as frantic. It wasn't as intense for them in their role, because it was so much more normalized. And it was, the people applying for jobs were already diverse, because we figured out a way to give people a leg up and an opportunity to get educated through. And here's my take on that is, again, nothing against higher ed, but a 4-year full-time program, some people just can't do. Whether I grew up as a son of my dad also was a refugee from Hungary. And so, some people just need to, I watched, you told me about his growing up years and what it was like to survive and care for his family. And even as a child, I'm like, going to university, none of us, not all of us can just kind of go to school full time, or benefit from that. So what if we figured out a way also to provide micro-credentialing to people so they could care for their family still? Maybe they're living at home, or maybe they're the breadwinner. And so that they can get that, call it rapid reskill, or get that kind of leg up and that promotion, or getting out of blue collar to white collar, or going out of blue collar to new collar, as we call it, these new employment opportunities in podcasting and social media marketing and SEO, so that they can make more money, serve their family more, and provide more of an opportunity to break that cycle of staying in the same jobs all the time.
I think that it's, just taking that step at an individual level in the next recruitment, in the next hiring, in the next project that has to go out, the next guest. This is something we see a lot in the podcasting world. If you stack up the guests of everyone, and Instagram is a good little place to see that. You stack up guest images beside each other, and then you're like, how's that looking for diversity, folks? And then really, taking yourself out of that for a minute and being like, how can I make my next, next person that's representing, that I'm speaking with, be a little bit more diverse. And I have to say, the big thing that I'm taking away from today, Darian, is call the people, the platforms you use, the tools, and ask them to put some more resources, and then co-create the solutions, instead of talking about, oh, there's nothing else. I've used this image because, there's no other images of people in boardrooms. Let's, sort of change that. Yeah. So before we let you go, how would you like people to reach you? For those who are listening who'd like to connect, where do you hang out?
Where do I hang out? You could, Barmai's like, I've been looking actually funny enough for a fax machine to see if I can't find them anywhere, because it'd be hilarious to actually get a fax number. And it'd be so fun to get a fax every once in a while, or get a carrier pigeon for the office, and like a carrier pigeon thing. We have like a balcony here, which would be really, really cool. Like kind of like throwbacks to the original communicate, or a pager. Like we could get a pager for the office.
Yes, a pager. Yes.
I know. Right. So no, otherwise, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, email. I'm on the email. These are all options. And as far as like show, we have a really Marketing News Canada. If you are into podcasting, that's where you can check out the Indigenous in marketing panel, which again, the hope is, who can you give a leg up for? I was recently asked by a marketing association to say, hey, Darian, can you help us find some Indigenous students that we can mentor? I'm like, that's amazing. You want to mentor Indigenous students. It's amazing. I was like, by the way, do you have any Indigenous mentors? Like, no, we don't know any Indigenous people in marketing. So mentors. I was like, but we want to mentor these people. So I was like, that is amazing. So do it, mentor people. But even at the same time, like look around, look for those peers, look for that person you can even kind of pull up, right? There's the opposite. There's this great musician in Chaos out of Toronto, had this song called Crabs in a Bucket. It's like, got my crabs in the bucket, trying to get down, but growing up. And it's a term, meaning if you've ever seen crabs in a bucket, I live on the West Coast here in BC. And so sometimes growing up, we would go and catch crabs and literally put them in a bucket. And you think, well, that's not smart. They're going to climb on each other and jump out. But they don't, because crabs, when in a bucket, actually at every opportunity they get, they pull them down. They literally, they're just, I remember one time watching them, they're just about to crawl over. They made this great little kind of like on each other's shoulders. And then all of a sudden, dragged back down. And so if you can think of the flip of that, of saying, well, I don't know if the term is for the opposite of crabs in a bucket. Well, there's the idea of like standing on the shoulders of giants. But if there's some way you can even just pull someone up a little bit, and it may not even be much, like just to give a little leg up, like look around for those in your circle right now. And that would be my kind of CTA, as any good digital marketer should leave you with. My call to action is, who can you lift up right now around you, whether it's a big lift or even just a small lift, because that small thing can make a big difference.
Like it, here. Don't be the crab in the bucket. Well said. All right. Thank you, folks. Thank you for joining us.
If you like what you're hearing, don't forget to hit subscribe, and please drop us a review. If you want to learn more about us or the ABCDEI podcast, visit abcdei.ca.